It's difficult to imagine how events as horrific and devastating as genocides could ever fade from memory. Yet history has shown us that even the gravest of atrocities can be neglected or outright forgotten. The Assyrian Genocide, in particular, is one such tragedy that has slipped through the cracks of the world's collective memory. This genocide was one of 3 major extermination campaigns conducted by the Ottoman Empire during World War I as part of a coordinated attempt to reshape the demographic landscape of what is now modern-day Turkey. The Assyrian people are an ancient ethnic group with deep historical roots in the Middle East. They are the descendants of one of the oldest civilizations in human history, the Assyrian Empire, which once spanned much of Mesopotamia. Though their empire fell long ago, the Assyrians persisted as a distinct ethnic group, maintaining their cultural and religious traditions for thousands of years. One of the key aspects of Assyrian identity is their language. Modern Assyrians speak dialects of Neo-Aramaic, a language directly descended from ancient Aramaic, the language spoken by Jesus Christ and his disciples. This linguistic connection to the past is a profound symbol of the Assyrian people's endurance, as they have managed to preserve their language and culture despite centuries of persecution and displacement. Religiously, the Assyrians are predominantly Christian. Over time, they became divided into several denominations, including the Assyrian Church of the East, the Syrian Orthodox Church, and the Chaldean Catholic Church. Each of these branches reflects different theological traditions, but they all share a common faith rooted in early Christianity. This religious identity further distinguished the Assyrians from the Muslim-majority Ottoman Empire, and their Christianity would tragically play a role in their persecution. However, unlike the Armenians, who had developed a relatively centralized political presence within the Ottoman Empire, the Assyrians lacked political unity. This absence of a unified political structure left them vulnerable. They lived in scattered communities across modern-day Turkey, Iran, and Iraq, making it difficult for them to organize resistance or diplomatic efforts on a large scale. This fragmentation, combined with their smaller population compared to the Armenians, made the Assyrians an easier target for the Ottoman government's genocidal policies. Well before the genocide of World War I, the Assyrians had already endured centuries of oppression and violence under various regimes, including the Ottomans. In the late 19th century, tensions escalated as the Ottoman Empire began to unravel, and the Assyrians, like other Christian minorities, became convenient scapegoats for the empire's internal problems. Between 1894 and 1896, during the reign of Sultan Abdul Hamid II, a series of massacres were carried out against Christian populations across the empire. These massacres, known as the Hamidian massacres, claimed the lives of tens of thousands of Armenians, Assyrians, and other Christians. The Assyrians, scattered across regions like Hakkari and Urmia, were not spared from this bloodshed. In addition to the violence, Assyrian communities faced widespread discrimination, land seizures, and forced conversion to Islam. These early waves of persecution foreshadowed the much larger and more systematic violence that would come during World War I, as the Assyrians found themselves caught in the crosshairs of Ottoman ethno-nationalism. By the early 20th century, the Assyrians were living under constant threat. Their villages were often raided, their lands taken, and their people subjected to forced assimilation. Despite these hardships, they held tightly to their faith, language, and identity. However, the fragility of their position in the Ottoman Empire would become fatally clear when the empire's rulers decided to reshape their nation through the brutal eradication of its non-Turkish and non-Muslim populations. The Assyrians, already weakened by decades of persecution, would suffer deeply during this genocidal campaign. As World War I erupted, the Ottoman Empire found itself at a critical crossroads. Once a vast and multi-ethnic empire, it was now in rapid decline, losing territory and influence. In this context of desperation and geopolitical tension, the leaders of the Ottoman Empire, especially those in the Committee of Union and Progress (CUP), embraced a radical ideology of Turkish ethno-nationalism. The driving force behind this shift was the desire to save what remained of the empire by transforming it into a homogeneous Turkish Muslim state. This would entail the removal, or more accurately, the extermination of any non-Turkish, non-Muslim minorities, including the Armenians, Greeks, and Assyrians. One of the architects of this new vision was Talat Pasha, one of the leading figures of the Ottoman government during World War I and a central planner of the genocides that followed. Talat and his fellow CUP leaders believed that the survival of the Ottoman Empire depended on purging ethnic and religious diversity. They sought to forge a new identity for the empire, one rooted in Turkish nationalism and Islamic unity, leaving no room for Christian minorities like the Assyrians. The rise of Turkish ethno-nationalism was not only a product of internal decay, but also a reaction to external pressures. The Ottoman Empire was on the losing side of the war, and many of its leaders feared that the empire's diverse populations, particularly the Christian minorities, could be manipulated by foreign powers, especially Russia, which had a history of supporting Christian groups in the region. The Assyrians, concentrated in border regions close to Russia and Iran, were seen as especially vulnerable to Russian influence. The Ottoman government viewed the Assyrians with growing suspicion, considering them a potential fifth column that could undermine their war efforts. This paranoia intensified after the Ottomans joined the Central Powers in 1914, aligning themselves with Germany and Austria-Hungary against the Allies, which included Russia. The Ottoman leadership feared that Christian minorities, including the Assyrians, might side with the Allied forces, particularly Russia, which had a vested interest in the region. While there was little concrete evidence that Assyrians had organized widespread collaboration with the Russians, the Ottomans used this fear as a justification for their brutal policies. In October 1914, Talat Pasha issued a decree that marked the beginning of the Assyrian Genocide. This order called for the deportation and expulsion of Assyrians from key strategic areas, particularly those near the empire's borders with Russia and Iran. Under the guise of security concerns, the Ottoman government launched a campaign to systematically dismantle Assyrian communities. The goal was not just to move these populations away from sensitive border zones, but to destroy their social fabric entirely, dismantling their culture, language, religion, and communal ties. This effort was designed to weaken the Assyrians to a point where they could no longer maintain their identity or resist Ottoman control. Talat Pasha, along with other leaders like Enver Pasha and Jamal Pasha, saw the war as an opportunity to reshape the empire. They believed that a more ethnically homogeneous state would be stronger and more cohesive. This belief was rooted in the rise of nationalist ideologies that had taken hold across Europe in the 19th and early 20th centuries. However, while other nations pursued nationalist agendas through political reforms or independence movements, the Ottoman Empire's leaders sought to achieve their vision through violence, expulsion, and genocide. Following the orders of Talat Pasha and other Ottoman leaders, Assyrians were forced from their homes and joined the Armenians on what became infamous as death marches through the deserts of present-day Turkey and Syria. These marches were not merely displacements, they were calculated acts of extermination. The death marches were brutal, designed to annihilate the Assyrian population through exhaustion, starvation, and direct violence. Thousands of Assyrians, including women, children, and the elderly, were forced to walk miles under the scorching desert sun with little food or water. Those who lagged behind or collapsed from exhaustion were either left to die or shot on the spot by Ottoman soldiers and their Kurdish collaborators. Survivors of these marches described scenes of horror, lines of bodies stretched across barren landscapes, families torn apart, and entire groups massacred en route. This was a methodical effort by the Ottoman authorities to reduce the Assyrian population to a fraction of its pre-war numbers. For many Assyrians, staying in their villages meant certain death. Some attempted to flee to neighboring Iran, hoping that crossing an international border would offer them safety. However, even this desperate act of self-preservation was not enough to escape Ottoman persecution. The Ottomans brazenly violated Iranian sovereignty, sending military forces across the border to hunt down and kill fleeing Assyrians. The empire's leadership, fixated on eliminating the Assyrians at any cost, refused to respect international boundaries, viewing the extermination of this minority as a top priority. As the campaign of extermination escalated, it became clear that survival could only come through resistance. led by Catholics patriarch Ma-Shimun, the spiritual and political leader of the Assyrians. Many within the community chose to fight back against their oppressors. Despite their relatively small numbers and lack of resources, the Assyrians demonstrated remarkable courage, organizing defensive efforts in an attempt to protect their villages and families from annihilation. Ma-Shimun played a pivotal role in galvanizing the resistance. As a religious figure, he held significant influence over the Assyrian people, and in their moment of greatest need, he became not just a spiritual leader, but also a military and diplomatic figure. Ma-Shimun sought alliances with the Russians, who were engaged in their own struggle against the Ottoman Empire as part of World War I. Recognizing the strategic importance of the Assyrian fighters, Russian commanders agreed to support them in their efforts to defend their homes. Ma-Shimun's negotiations with the Russians led to a temporary alliance, and Assyrian fighters began working alongside Russian troops in the region. Armed with whatever weapons they could find, Assyrian men, and in some cases even women, took up arms to defend their people. These makeshift militias fought valiantly against the far better equipped Ottoman forces. However, despite their bravery and determination, the odds were heavily stacked against the Assyrians. They were vastly outnumbered, and their lack of military infrastructure made it difficult to sustain long-term resistance. The Ottoman military, enraged by any form of defiance, responded with unparalleled brutality. Entire villages were marked for destruction, with Ottoman commanders showing no mercy to civilians or fighters alike. The punishment for resistance was swift and merciless. Ottoman soldiers unleashed horrific violence, massacring anyone they encountered, men, women, and children. Homes were burned to the ground. Livestock was slaughtered, and churches, the spiritual heart of many Assyrian communities, were desecrated. In their efforts to stamp out resistance, the Ottoman forces, led by commanders such as Cevdet Bey, became infamous for their cruelty. Cevdet Bey, known as the leader of the so-called Butcher Battalion, was responsible for some of the most heinous massacres of the Assyrian Genocide. Under his command, Ottoman soldiers carried out systematic extermination campaigns, targeting not only those who resisted, but entire villages and regions suspected of harboring resistance fighters. His name became synonymous with terror, and his troops razed villages to the ground, slaughtering their inhabitants in cold blood. One particularly chilling order that encapsulated the Ottoman approach came from the governor of Van Province. His infamous command, Yak Vur Alor, which translates to burn, demolish, kill, laid bare the genocidal intent of the Ottoman authorities. This was not merely a military campaign aimed at quelling an uprising. It was a deliberate and systematic effort to wipe out the Assyrian people, their culture, and their way of life. The use of such extreme language from high-ranking officials illustrates the depth of hatred and the extent of the violence the Assyrians faced. The Ottomans' genocidal campaign spread like wildfire across different regions, each area experiencing its own brutal chapter in this tragic history. The scale of the massacres varied from region to region, but the intent and the cruelty remained constant. In the province of Diyarbakir, the genocide reached levels of cruelty and organization that made it one of the most notorious regions of the Assyrian and Armenian genocides. The governor of Diyarbakir, Mehmed Rashid Bey, played a central role in orchestrating the extermination of Christians within his jurisdiction. A supporter of the Turkish nationalist vision, Rashid Bey saw the presence of Assyrians, Armenians, and other Christian minorities as a direct threat to the unity and purity of the Turkish state. Under Rashid Bey's orders, the province of Diyarbakir became a killing field for Assyrians and other Christians. Thousands were rounded up and massacred in cold blood. Rashid Bey orchestrated a highly organized system of extermination that saw Assyrian men separated from their families and executed en masse. The women and children who were left behind were often sent on forced death marches or subjected to sexual violence and forced conversions. Many of these women and girls were later sold into slavery. Unlike some regions where massacres were spontaneous or less coordinated, Diyarbakir's extermination was systematic and planned. Rashid Bey's approach was so ruthless that even other Ottoman officials were shocked by the extent of his cruelty. By the time Mehmed Rashid Bey's campaign of extermination had come to an end, tens of thousands of Christians, including Assyrians, had been killed in Diyarbakir alone. The province was left a wasteland of destruction, with countless villages depopulated and erased from existence. Despite the horrors, the stories of survival and acts of extraordinary heroism stand as a testament to the resilience of the Assyrian people. While hundreds of thousands were slaughtered, there were those who fought back, resisted, and managed to survive. One of the most remarkable figures in the history of Assyrian survival during the genocide is Mar Shimun. As we discussed before, Mar Shimun not only guided the spiritual lives of the Assyrians, but also played a crucial role in organizing their resistance and escape during the height of the genocide. As the genocidal campaign intensified, Mar Shimun realized that the Assyrians had little chance of survival if they remained in their ancestral homeland, surrounded on all sides by hostile forces. Faced with this reality, he made the difficult decision to lead tens of thousands of Assyrians on a dangerous journey to seek refuge in Russia. Despite the immense losses along the way, Mar Shimun's leadership helped save thousands of lives. Those who made it to Russian territory found temporary refuge, escaping the immediate threat of Ottoman persecution. Among the survivors were also people in the regions like Tukuma and Azak, who resisted the Ottoman military. Tukuma, a mountainous region known for its difficult terrain and strong-willed inhabitants, became a focal point of Assyrian resistance. The villages in this area, fortified and strategically located, allowed the Assyrians to defend themselves against Ottoman attacks. Similarly, in Azak, another Assyrian stronghold, local fighters mounted a tenacious defense against the Ottoman military. In addition to these organized efforts, individual acts of heroism also emerged. Men and women alike risked their lives to save others, hiding fellow Assyrians from Ottoman soldiers, providing food and shelter to refugees, and helping the wounded survive. Stories of parents shielding their children from bullets, and villagers sacrificing themselves to divert attention from the others, highlight the depth of courage shown during this dark period. Personal accounts of survival, such as that of Judah Abova, bring the horrors of the Assyrian genocide into sharp focus. Abova, a young Assyrian man at the time of the genocide, witnessed firsthand the atrocities committed by Ottoman soldiers and Kurdish militias. His village, like many others, was targeted for extermination. Yet despite the overwhelming violence, Abova survived by using his knowledge of the surrounding terrain to evade capture and death. He managed to hide in the mountains for days, living off the land and staying out of sight from the patrols searching for fleeing Assyrians. His account of survival is filled with harrowing moments, narrowly escaping capture, witnessing the murder of friends and neighbors, and enduring the terror of being hunted by soldiers. The stories of Assyrian resistance and survival are not only accounts of the past, but also a critical part of the Assyrian identity today. They all contribute to the narrative of a people who refused to be extinguished. By 1915, much of the physical destruction brought by the Assyrian genocide had been completed. However, the violence didn't stop with the initial mass killings. Sporadic massacres continued well into the later years of World War I and even beyond, as remnants of the Ottoman Empire and allied militias continued their relentless persecution of Assyrian survivors. One of the most significant events marking the end of organized Assyrian resistance came in 1918, when Mar Shimun was assassinated. His murder shattered the unity that had held the Assyrian people together during the genocide, leaving them vulnerable to further attacks. The scale of the Assyrian genocide is staggering. Between 250,000 and 300,000 Assyrians were killed, an estimated half of the pre-war population. In the aftermath, justice for the victims proved elusive. Few, if any, of the perpetrators faced significant punishment for their roles in the systematic extermination of the Assyrian people. The Ottoman authorities who planned and executed the genocide were never held fully accountable for their crimes. The collapse of the Ottoman Empire in the wake of World War I, coupled with the political chaos in the region, allowed many of the architects of the genocide to evade justice. Mehmed Rashid Bey managed to escape justice in the most infamous way, by committing suicide before he could be tried for his crimes. While some Ottoman officials were briefly tried in military tribunals following the war, these trials were largely superficial and politically motivated. Many of the officials responsible for the genocide, including Talat Pasha, were either assassinated in exile or lived out their lives without facing meaningful consequences. Talat Pasha himself was assassinated in 1921 in Berlin by an Armenian nationalist as part of Operation Nemesis. But formal justice for the Assyrian genocide remained unpursued. Surviving Assyrians were forced to scatter across the globe, creating a diaspora that remains significant today. This displacement led to the fragmentation of Assyrian communities and their culture. The Assyrian language, traditions, and identity faced further erosion as communities were uprooted from their homelands and resettled in foreign lands, often with little support or recognition. Despite these challenges, the Assyrian community in the diaspora has continued to preserve its cultural heritage. Assyrians around the world work to keep their language, history, and traditions alive, while also advocating for international recognition of the genocide and justice for their ancestors. One of the most tragic things about this genocide is the continued denial of its existence by the Turkish government and the broader international community. To this day, Turkey officially denies that the genocide against the Assyrians, Armenians, and Greeks took place, dismissing it as a baseless accusation. This denial compounds the suffering of the Assyrian people, whose ancestors' deaths have been effectively erased from official historical narratives. Only a handful of countries, including Armenia, France, Germany, and Sweden, have formally recognized the Assyrian genocide. But international recognition remains limited. The lack of accountability and denial has also contributed to ongoing instability for Assyrians in the Middle East. To this day, Assyrian communities in Iraq, Syria, and elsewhere face persecution, displacement, and violence, with many of the same patterns of oppression repeating themselves. As more people learn about this hidden chapter of history, there is hope that the Assyrian genocide will no longer be forgotten, and that recognition will lead to reconciliation. Learning from these atrocities is crucial if we are to prevent history from repeating itself.